What happens when a quirky 30-something decides to outsmart the HOA tyrant next door with a skunk-scented surprise? Prepare for a clash of wills that's anything but ordinary. The day dawned bright and deceptively peaceful, but for me, a storm was brewing beneath the surface. I poured myself some coffee, extra strong this time, preferably to fuel my impending detective escapades, and glanced towards the empty space where my beloved Amazon packages usually graced my doorstep. Just last week, I had been eagerly waiting for a pair of fuzzy socks and a questionable decision to embrace the world of adult coloring books. However, today, I found only a glaring void where countless online impulse buys ought to have been. I couldn't help but channel my inner Sherlock Holmes, complete with dramatic investigations and cunning disguises, so I threw on my favorite beanie, which, I keenly believed, had impeccable investigative powers of its own. My first stop was the culprit herself, Geraldine Huxley, the gray-haired hawk who perched herself at the tippy top of the HOA hierarchy. I had long since given up on pretending she wasn't the embodiment of my worst HOA nightmares. Peering through her lace curtains, her hawkish eyes scanned the street like a sniper, waiting for her prey, a little too sinister for my taste. Tyler, my trusty sidekick and forever comedian, had dubbed her the entitlement enforcer. As an amateur sleuth, my task was clear. Confront this Madam Thief with the evidence I so intuitively believed would shed light on my missing treasures. Armed with only a batch of half-baked yet hopeful strategies, I tiptoed to her porch, trying to ignore the heavy layer of dread weighing down my caffeinated spirit. "Excuse me, Geraldine," I called, channeling my best charm, even if it was a challenge to display any kindness towards a person who literally faxed me a complaint about my flower pots. She opened the door, a glimmer of surprise flitting across her eyes before morphing back into that frozen disapproval I had grown all too accustomed to. I wanted to chat about some missing packages. I began, but her lips pressed tighter than a clam in an ocean spasm. "I have no time for trivial matters, Jordan. It's all nonsense. You should be keeping your Amazon addiction under control," she retorted. "Who needs a villain in a superhero movie when you have such a perfectly good adversary right next door?" My indecision melted away, and an idea, a deliciously wicked idea, began to bloom in my brain. "Well, you know, Geraldine, I might just have a plan," I exclaimed, leaning closer and lowering my tone for dramatic effect, which also, I should admit, made me feel quite dangerous. "What if I were to set a little trap? A decoy package, perhaps? One that really pops off, if you know what I mean." A smirk threatened to dance across my face. "Let the world witness how I turn this petty drama onto its head." Much to my delight, her hawk-like expression faltered for the briefest moment. Disappointment, perhaps, that I hadn't proposed a society brunch instead. A fleeting moment of victory warmed my insides as I nodded goodbye and retreated to my lair, Tyler's apartment, where the real brainstorming could commence. We whipped together a plan so absurdly genius that it almost felt criminal. A faux package stuffed with a strategically selected item, a skunk-scented candle. Given my history of playing it safe with neutral fragrances, this was definitely in the pleasingly malicious category. "This is like an HOA version of a booby trap," Tyler chuckled, the image of Geraldine's disdainful face filling us both with joy. We affixed a bright orange sticker on the outside declaring, "Do not open, I smell bad things," ominous enough to ward off any potential thieves, or at least prompt them to reconsider any toasty candlelit plans they had in mind for that evening. Little did Geraldine know that I was about to give her a taste of her own medicine, and make that a little scented as well. The day came when the bait was ready, and I dropped the package directly on my doorstep, my heart pounding with betrayal and laughter. As if the universe was conspiring for optimal drama, Geraldine was outside, pruning her hedge, eyeing my space with her predatory gaze. I held my breath, expecting her to pounce like some wild animal on her unsuspecting prey, and lo and behold, she did. Moments passed, shredding noise, a noise that could only be described as an elderly woman suddenly struck mad, and I peered from behind a nearby hydrangea bush, unable to stifle the laugh bubbling within. Was that truly the scent of sweet, skunky karma wafting through the air? My mind raced with visions of her expressions, the Huxley Bloody Mary face she'd sport when realizing she'd been bested by a crafty 30-something in leggings. As I reveled in the moment, the surrounding neighbors couldn't hide their giggles, some already taking out their phones to capture the unfolding disaster. Geraldine stood there, aghast, cradling the scented candle like it was the Holy Grail, but covered in the sins of her own entitlement. Tyler joined me behind the hydrangea, barely able to contain his laughter as the irony of it all settled into the atmosphere. My heart soared with victory, warming the very cockles of my soul. Who knew a tiny bout of pettiness could lead to such unanticipated delight and community solidarity? After all the struggle against the HOA tyranny, the skunk had truly cast its magic, and I could finally relish in the sweet satisfaction of poetic justice delivered right to my doorstep. As I perched behind the hydrangea bush, a mix of exhilaration and disbelief battled for supremacy within me. The sight of Geraldine standing rigidly in front of my front door, her hawkish gray eyes wide and mouth agape, sent ripples of joy through my entire being. The skunk-scented candle was right there, her nemesis, cradled against her chest like a child's blankie. In that moment, I couldn't help but imagine the scenarios conjured up in her mind. Was this some grand ploy by the neighborhood longhorned villain? Or simply a form of low-level retribution for her previous package thefts? Little did she know that the people she dismissed as youthful troublemakers were now comfortably tucked into the narrative that painted her as the villain in our little community drama. What added to the spectacle was the onlookers' mixed reactions. Neighbors who had once tiptoed around Geraldine were now gathered in their lawns like a living audience at a theatrical show. There was Martha, clutching her poodle and whispering to Steve, who was desperately attempting to hold back his laughter while his wife simply shook her head in disbelief. I caught a glimpse of a few kids across the street, their giggles bubbling uncontrollably as they watched the disarray unfold. It felt like I was watching reality television unfold on my front lawn, The Real Housewives of HOA, Revenge Edition. I turned to Tyler, who was almost doubled over with laughter, and said, "Is this what they meant by instant karma?" He responded with a theatrically solemn nod. "Indeed, it's as if the universe created a candy store just for us today." With both palms pressed against the hydrangea bush and my heart racing, I held my breath, biting back a smile. Geraldine, still visibly affronted by the aromatic assault, gingerly shifted her eyes towards my supposedly treacherous doorstep. It was a priceless instant, the exact moment she began to process the detail that the package was indeed mine. Panic began to seep through her stoic facade. Could the audacity of the younger generation have truly found a way to tease out her superficial sense of superiority? "You think you can lecture me?" she screeched, her voice cracking in a way that reminded me of a rusty hinge. "This is a complete disgrace." I barely contained my glee, wanting to shout, "Welcome to my world." As her dramatics erupted like an untamed theatrical performance, a glimmer of victory began to illuminate my thoughts. Suddenly, my annoyance with losing dozens of packages paled in comparison to the sheer joy radiating in the moment. For once, I wasn't just the frustrated victim. I was the girl who sent the HOA tyrant into chaotic disarray. The tide was turning, and I less felt like the quirky outsider and more like the neighborhood justice crusader. I couldn't help but imagine an ingenious island retreat where I hosted local homeowners, showcasing the skunk as the culinary centerpiece. Oh, the possibilities. Would there be educational workshops titled "How to Avoid Unwelcome Entanglements with Your Neighbors," or perhaps group discussions on the merits of package security? Then, as if in slow motion, Geraldine's resolve began to crack. The sheer absurdity of the situation washed over her as the reality of her hijinks hit home. "Have you lost your marbles?" she spluttered, her cheeks flushed with the realization of her own poor choices. What a childish stunt. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed she was about to pivot towards an apology. But the ferocity with which she defended herself only gave weight to my victorious stance. Wanting nothing more than to amplify this moment, I stood up and bellowed, "You know, Geraldine, I might just be calling this a neighborhood peace treaty. What do you say? For a brief moment, the world around me seemed to pause. The whispers faded, and all eyes turned towards Geraldine, still suffocating under the weight of the skunk-scented candle. I didn't even need to know what she would say. One glance at her expression told the story. She could either wallow in her defiance or choose the path of unexpected humility. Stirred by the mounting anticipation, I felt emboldened to lean further into my vendetta with a shot of compassion. We could turn a new leaf together, you know, I added playfully. Everyone loves a good scent. How about we host a gathering? Maybe even involve some skunk-themed decor. The moment was electric. Jordan the carpet cleaner turned into Jordan the skunk-scented vigilante, combating HOA trespasses one stinky candle at a time. As I ended my left-field proposal, I felt Tyler's hand on my shoulder, nudging me toward the edge of absurdity. Geraldine's eyes darted, processing my offer with the same care a cat gives when spotting a cucumber. The laughter of my neighbors began to seep into the air, and I knew that ridicule, even if light-hearted, was seeping into her tiny fortress of hatred. Whoever knew a simple skunk candle could unravel the many layers of entitlement blocking her vision. But would she choose to fight or fold? In the grand scheme of things, perhaps I was a tad petty. Yes. Yet at that moment, I savored the fleeting taste of victory, where the lawn gnome rebellion became a formidable manifesto against tyranny. Watching the tableau unfold before my eyes, I couldn't help but marvel at how an ordinary facade had hid behind an extraordinary tale. Life with an HOA was unconventional, however. The lingering question stood boldly in the air. Was Geraldine ready to laugh about it with us, or was she set on a bitter retaliatory season? I listened intently, bracing for what came next. The silence that enveloped the scene was so thick, you could slice it with a butter knife. As Geraldine processed my outlandish proposal, her thin lips pressed into a tight line, betraying a moment of uncertainty. Could the ruler of the HOA really consider trading her austere demeanor for a soiree of skunky camaraderie? In that instant, I could almost hear the wheels of judgment spinning in her head, recalibrating her self-image as the neighborhood's arbiter of right and wrong. She looked from me to the cackling crowd and back, her hawkish eyes calculating the potential humiliation against the benefit of letting this go. Honestly, the sheer absurdity of my suggestion tickled me deeply. What if she truly agreed to the absurd gathering? What if we made a show of it, flinging her compliance in the faces of the community? Suddenly, she took a deep breath, almost as if she were steeling herself for battle. "You think that I would stoop so low as to participate in your trivial antics?" she retorted, her voice dripping with scorn. However, I detected the slightest tremor beneath her facade, a crack in the armor of the woman who had so adamantly infringed upon my life. Ignoring her rebuff, I decided to press on. "Oh, come on, Geraldine. Everyone loves a good themed party," I proclaimed, basking in the warmth of my neighbor's astonishment and giggles. Imagine it now. Party like a skunk, complete with specially crafted appetizers, skunk bites, and of course, skunky drinks. I gestured wildly, envisioning the neighborhood decked out in skunk-themed attire, tossing around inflatable flamingos amid the revelry. The absurdity brightened the scene, and even I had to chuckle at the thought. For every ounce of defiance in her, I could see a glimmer of uncertainty lurking. She might just be intrigued. The whispers from the crowd intensified, creating a delightful symphony of excitement tinged with disbelief. Who wants to bet she goes home and concocts a skunky revenge plot? Tyler mused, barely managing to keep straight-faced. The cacophony of laughter grew louder, and a couple of neighbors began exchanging glances, eagerly awaiting Geraldine's next move as if we were all witness to an improv performance. She finally squinted at me, perhaps measuring how serious I was, or more importantly, gauging how deep the rabbit hole had become. "A shameful suggestion," she finally declared, waving a reclaiming hand as if to smite my proposal away. But the unmistakable flicker in her eyes betrayed her true feelings. Was she fighting for her dignity, or considering the possibility of joy? In a drastic twist of fate, it was as though someone hit the pause button on reality, capturing all the ridiculousness of that very moment in an oversized picture frame. The community's most audacious elder sheriff, flustered by an impromptu skunk party suggestion. Geraldine's visage morphed, exuding defiance mixed with undeniable curiosity. And despite the barriers she had built over the years, the impending laughter, poised to leap toward her like a hungry puppy, was contagious. Who could resist the allure of camaraderie and potential reprieve from her long-standing rules? The culmination of absurdity laughter escalated as one neighbor chimed in, "Count me in! Skunk-themed nachos, anyone?" Their enthusiasm was infectious, creating an atmosphere of camaraderie that I didn't know this HOA could muster. As Geraldine fought to maintain her iron grip on decorum, it appeared that the tide of sulkiness was shifting. The realization washed over me like the late afternoon sun breaking through clouds. A sense of incredulous hope. Maybe, just maybe, I would drag her along into the entrancing whirl of assertion masquerading as transcendence. I decided to fire another shot. Perhaps I could sway her wholeheartedly, or at least provoke an even deeper reaction. You may find it therapeutic, Geraldine. Who knows? You could emerge from this debacle as a neighborhood favorite, rather than a feared overlord. My voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with mock sincerity as I gazed back at her, an expression of faux admiration plastered on my face. The surrounding neighbors chuckled, fueling the contest of wills between me and the woman who once thought of herself as the neighborhood dragon. But finally, after what felt like an eternity of inner wrestling, I saw that glimmer of defeated resolve reflected in Geraldine's gaze. Her consternation transformed into something almost reminiscent of understanding, or was it begrudging acceptance? With a resigned sigh that conveyed her struggle, she took a step closer, finally relenting. "Fine," she exclaimed, glaring at me as if my proposal was somehow the most pedestrian of tasks. "But if it's to be party like a skunk, then we shall do it right. You better be prepared to make this an event to remember, Taylor." My heart raced with exhilaration as I realized the absurdity I engineered had a chance to shake the very foundations of our antediluvian HOA. As jubilant cheers erupted in the background, I could hardly believe we had reached this juncture. My heart swelled with the promise of laughter turning the wheels of change. Geraldine, with her spiked infusion of authority, reluctantly choosing to be a part of something playful rather than punitive. No longer was she merely the extractable essence of distress in my life. There existed a hint of potential partnership, a glimmer of camaraderie hidden behind the bitter stalemate of enforced regulations. Would this community rise together, unify in celebration, or would the dust settle as the usual bitter noise against the fabric of progress? It appeared that the skunk might just become our unlikely herald of humor and change, and I couldn't wait to discover where this strange new trajectory would lead us. As the echoes of cheering faded, a peculiar calm settled over the crowd, transforming a mild-mannered HOA meeting into a chaotic planning committee for a skunk-themed party. The box that once held my Amazon package lay abandoned in the grass, not just a container for my wayward delivery, but a potent symbol of the impending hilarity. I was exhilarated and slightly bewildered by how quickly this ridiculous idea had snowballed into an absurd reality. Geraldine, clutching her clipboard as if it were her lifeline, was trying to summon her former indomitable aura, but I could see the flicker of mischief dancing in her hawkish eyes. Would she inevitably become the star of this ridiculous spectacle? The next 3 days felt like an exciting whirlwind. Tyler and I dove headfirst into the preparations, armed with an arsenal of inflatable flamingos, skunky snacks, and neon decorations. I even went as far as to design a banner that read, "Welcome to the Skunk Fest." 2 doors down, Brenda, a sweet lady with wild lavender hair and an obsession for crafting, brought over her famous skunk cupcakes, complete with little fondant skunks that gleamed like pieces of art. It truly took a village to celebrate our newfound insanity, and my heart swelled at the sight of my neighbors laughing and working together for the first time in years. Every time I saw Geraldine, she would wink at me, though I suspect it was less about camaraderie and more about a shared sense of mischief. But let's not forget the air of suspense hovering just above that festive atmosphere. Geraldine had gone full throttle into her event organizer role, inspecting every detail with a critical eye, as if judging the aesthetics of skunk appetizer platters would finally earn her divine approval in the HOA Hall of Fame. She upheld her image, yet you could see those thin lips quirk at the edges whenever she caught sight of her tiniest neighbors getting into the spirit of things. "Jordan, these napkins need to be a soft shade of cream, reminiscent of a proper skunk tail," she insisted, brandishing them between her fingers like a judicial scepter. I couldn't help but chuckle, standing on the sidelines with Tyler, who added, "This is precisely why we can't have nice things, Geraldine. You're destined to take the fun out of flammable, sketchy affairs." As the sun dipped low in the sky on the day of the festivity, it draped our neighborhood in a golden hue, the tension finally bubbling over into an atmosphere of jubilant mischief. Armed with my camera, I reveled in capturing every comical moment. The sight of Geraldine reluctantly enjoying the skunk bites, her demeanor softened as she laughed outright at the absurdity of it all. The neighbors donned matching skunk hats, grinning like children at a fair, while children chased each other around with inflatable flamingos, creating a visual tapestry of chaotic joy. Tyler's stand-up routine, featuring comedic takes on HOA rules and skunk-related puns, cast infectious laughter that rang through the hall, invoking even the most stoic resident to crack a smile, or perhaps merely cringe. Yet the glorious crescendo of the evening peaked as the official event competition unfolded, the Best Skunk Costume Contest. Each costume boasted unique creativity, effectively transforming Geraldine into a reluctant judge whose stringent demeanor reminded us that here was the woman who had banned yard flamingos mere weeks prior, now seated in full taxidermy splendor, beside the glittering cardboard Skunk Fest throne. I could hardly contain my laughter when she narrowed her eyes at a contestant dressed as a zebra sporting a shrubbery-covered tail. "That's clearly not a skunk," she barked, the crowd erupting in giggles. "Geraldine," I called, throwing my arms up in exasperation. "You knew we were going for a theme here. This is your chance to embrace creativity." As the competition climaxed with the announcement of winners, the neighborhood truly had convened, not merely to celebrate a skunk-themed fiasco, but to redefine the collective spirit that Geraldine had stifled for years. Geraldine's transformation was tangible. Her rigid back relaxed, her lips smoothed into a soft smile that was, dare I say, almost genuine. When she called up the winner, 4-year-old Timmy, dressed in a dazzling, glittery skunk suit, wrapped him in a giant hug that echoed down the street. The sight stirred me into reflection, and I realized the ridiculous skunk-themed gathering had inadvertently acted as a balm for our fractured neighborhood. What if Geraldine learned a lesson from this? Wasn't it time our HOA overthrew the bitter matronly stamp so rife in our community? As the evening spun out in laughter and camaraderie, I stood back admiring the joyful madness. Geraldine had traded her hawkish persona for a nurturing spirit, and I found myself struck by the sheer absurdity of the transformation. Would this signify the dawn of a new era for our HOA? A neighborhood that celebrated unity over draconian rules? My heart hummed with excitement at the possibilities. Geraldine approached me hesitantly, her clipboard finally laid to rest under a makeshift table adorned with cupcake platters. "Jordan," she said, her voice steadier yet overflowing with uncharacteristic warmth, "I must admit, you may have added just a sprinkle of joy I didn't know I needed. And with that, I knew our tales of mischief were only just beginning." There was a sparkle in the air following the Skunk Fest that lingered long after the inflatable flamingos had been deflated and the glittery costumes hung up for the next big neighborhood bash. Like a sweet potion brewed under the moon, the spirit of community blossomed anew among us. Tyler was already spouting off punchlines about skunks and HOAs. Who knew they could even be intermingled? "Did you hear about the skunk who violated the HOA rules?" he quipped, pausing for dramatic effect before launching into his punchline. Turns out, he was just trying to keep his tail down. The eruption of laughter echoed through the sidewalks, and I let out a splendid belly laugh, feeling lighter than I had in a very long time. Perhaps Geraldine had ignited something inside us all. At the very least, it felt like a sea change was upon us. A week passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd somehow drawn an invisible line in the sand. What started as a prank had morphed into a heartfelt gathering, and even Geraldine had begun to loosen her vice grip on the community newsletter, scribbling in ink rather than dictating a regimented decree. "I might miss that punny corner dedicated to skunks and puns, Jordan," she said, handing me a hot cup of cider at a follow-up meeting. Her cheeks tinted as if she discovered a fun color palette for the first time. "Though we may need to regulate how long they stay in print, we wouldn't want to offend anyone's sensibilities." The sight of her now comfortable grin cemented the fact that our mission had not only succeeded, but had sparked a ridiculous lightheartedness in our otherwise buttoned-up circle. And so began our motley journey into outrageous neighborhood antics, each subsequent gathering spiraling out of the ordinary and into the delightfully absurd. My neighbors, previously stuck in silence under the heavy thumb of regulations, danced through spontaneous BBQs, potlucks, and even a flash mob in the park to encourage better lawn care. I could hardly believe it as I encountered Ralph from across the street showing up with a ukulele, repeating a gentle riff while belting out Three Little Birds, each time Brenda neutrally suggested lawn decorations. The sight of him strumming felt like pure magic layered over a shocking act of rebellion. In the face of this newfound spirit, Geraldine had become the unexpected cheerleader, anchoring down the chaos whilst wearing a neon vest that read Chaos Coordinator. Admittedly, I sometimes found myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting Geraldine to pull a stealthy fast one and enforce some ancient rule lurking in the depths of the HOA archives, but her hawkish eyes twinkled with joy rather than strict scrutiny. It truly felt like the HOA had been infiltrated by joy, and the harmony among neighbors burgeoned as Geraldine turned policymaking into collaborative brainstorming sessions, encouraging everything from community gardens to an evening book club I enthusiastically volunteered to initiate. Imagine this: me, the unabashed instigator of chaos, leading a council of literature lovers while revealing the literary dangers of skunks. "The audacity," I murmured to Tyler, seeking affirmation. Who knew there were more pots in the fire than proper lawn care? Yet, amidst the fun, it seemed that Geraldine's brief honeymoon with revelry had reached a snippet of déjà vu. One day, I caught her peeking into my yard, undoubtedly eyeing the 2 flamingo decorations that flourished, so planted beside an expansive flower patch. "Jordan, I must insist," she commanded with a measured authority, circling back to her former self. "These flamingos aren't exactly in the spirit of our yard aesthetics. I mean, we've talked about the importance of decorum." My jaw dropped comically, and Tyler sidled up beside me, barely containing a chortle while clutching his stomach. "I think you might be a little too late with the Joyration Act, Geraldine," he retorted, causing her lips to twitch ever so slightly at the edges before she spun away to inspect Brenda's garishly whimsical wind chimes. And so, the pendulum swung back into a precarious balance, the absurdity a constant fixture within our dynamic. My phone buzzed incessantly, and lo and behold, it was an invitation from Geraldine herself. "Community Skunk Renewal Day," it proclaimed boldly, as if this morning's trance of harmonious laughter had returned to push against stiff rules, with open hearts once more. I glanced at Tyler, who stared back, wide-eyed and hopeful. Should we dare? Would this renewal signify receding skunk madness, or usher in more delightful chaos? "You think she's uplifting a new themed holiday?" I queried, my heart racing at the possibilities. Would we spend an entire day in the enchanting grasp of skunks and silliness forevermore? Through peaks between our lifted brows, it was clear that the HOA's evolution was far from over, and perhaps those wildly joyous experiences, contrasted against the more designated tasks, had opened a tide of lively possibilities. There was an air of anticipation as we neared the date of Skunk Renewal Day. The hope remained that instead of breaking out into stringent guidelines, we crafted an identity out of friendship and laughter. Would the balance form a bridge between shared interests and the absurdity of our earlier bickering, or would it lead us back toward a renewal of caution-taped liberty? Whatever to follow, one thing was certain. With a skunk in the spotlight, consequences may just be the last laugh we could expect. The week leading up to Skunk Renewal Day was nothing short of a comedic circus. The humidity grew thicker with each passing day, and balloons floated high around the neighborhood, trumpeting the absurdity of the event. My phone buzzed relentlessly with messages from neighbors, each one obsessively brainstorming games, skunk-themed refreshments. Who knew skunky cupcakes would be a thing? And even a draft for a skunk-centric talent show. Tyler, ever the optimistic acrobat in this grand circus, suggested we recreate the famous skunk escape scene from The Great Escape, but, with actual skunks. I couldn't help but roll my eyes at the ludicrousness of it all, yet found myself chuckling at how far we had come since the days of Geraldine's tyrannical reign. As if on cue, a neighbor voiced what everyone had been thinking: do we need to hire a guard cat? Because I can't imagine a more chaotic scene. As Skunk Renewal Day dawned, I ventured outside, flustered and hopeful. The community transformed into a riot of color that rivaled a toddler's paint palette, with decorations popping up exuberantly in all corners. Think vibrant streamers and hand-painted signs declaring, "Skunks Unite." Tyler sported a handmade shirt designed with none other than a fawn-colored skunk sporting sunglasses, which he swore was fashion-forward. It's not just a shirt, it's a lifestyle statement. He grinned, throwing his arms wide, ready to embrace the world. I took it all in, this newfound connection among our neighbors feeling surreal in its absurdity. We gathered in my front yard, our laughter intertwining with a live band that was decidedly not made up of skunks, but instead of enthusiastic locals who doubled as music teachers. Their riffs floated through the air, buoyed by our spirits, as we braced ourselves for a day packed with skunk-themed shenanigans. The feeling of elation was palpable, yet an underlying current of fear wiggled through me any time I caught sight of Geraldine. Despite her transformation into a newfound cheerleader, she still commanded an aura of officiality, like a joyous windbreaker hiding a rigid foundation underneath. Would she suddenly lurch back into her old ways, sprinkling stifling regulations across our carnival of silliness? Just as I pondered this, I spotted her, clad in a sparkly headband that resembled a skunk tail, standing resolutely in front of the registration table with an air of competition about her. Now remember, everyone, Skunk Ball Dodge is a legitimate tournament. No non-skunk paraphernalia shall be allowed, she declared, her thin lips pursed in what might have been an attempt to smile. Tyler couldn't hold back. "Are you sure we shouldn't have turned this into a license to skunk event?" he quipped, dodging a skunk plush that flew through the air, hurled with glee by one of the younger residents. The laughter erupted, spiraling through the crowd like the candy confetti that filled the center of our yard, popping and exploding in technicolor chaos. I watched as Geraldine's sharp expression softened for just a second before she mustered what I could only identify as a combat-ready glare, which promptly vanished when someone challenged her to pile on more skunk-themed trivia for our scavenger hunt. In a world overshadowed by competition, it was splendid to see her engage, if only for a fleeting moment, in the euphoria that spun around us all. As the day unfolded, I felt surreal joy wash over me, reminding me of how far we had come. From the primal agony of stolen packages to the adult friendships forming among the absurdity of skunks, everything tingled with possibilities I never expected. In an act of synchronized hilarity, we launched into the skunk parade, where everyone pranced down the street donning makeshift skunk costumes, some remarkably clever, while others, let's say, provided a certain skunky quality that became the quintessential charm of our day. I giggled as neighbors pulled together their inner children, complete with water balloons designed as our favorite black and white mischief makers, because really, how could we resist? But just as I felt comfortable thinking our newly formed community could dance over the hurdles of decorum, Geraldine called for everyone to halt. With an exaggerated cough and the gravity of a seasoned deficient, she rallied us, arms raised high. "Let me remind all of you," she began, unsheathing her authority. "The HOA has its standards, and even in the spirit of fun, we cannot allow our reputation to be hijacked by chaos, True skunk spirit requires proper decorum. The collective gasp was almost theatrical, and Tyler leaned over to whisper. And thus, the hero slowly becomes the villain again. As if on cue, the sight of Geraldine struggling to balance both joy and control encapsulated the very essence of our day's trials. In that moment, the tension morphed into a newfound determination. Geraldine's authoritative voice seemed to boost the comedic engagement rather than suppress it. The very notion of decorum became the next punchline. Laughter swirled through the air, paving a way for a resurgence of camaraderie as neighbors excitedly endorsed skunk customs that slipped slowly from Geraldine's fingertips. Who needed decorum when spontaneity sang louder? Because in reality, this gathering neatly punctuated the bridge we had built, not just of skunks, but of shared life experiences, of laughter, outstretched handshakes, and a commitment to live more fully together. This grand oscillation between being the rule maker and rule breaker could only lead us to more outrageous escapades and laughter-fueled chaos in the future. Where would it all lead us from here? As the skunk renewal day barreled towards its climactic end, the atmosphere became thick with creative chaos. Our parade twirled into an unexpected showdown, with residents squabbling over who donned the finest skunk-inspired attire. Larry, our neighbor with the questionable talent for fashion, had draped himself in a costume that was half man, half skunk, complete with a tail that flopped gracelessly behind him. I couldn't help but think it looked less like a skunk and more like a confused raccoon. All I could hear were the enthusiastic chants of skunk-tastic and you're a stinker, swirling around, layering the day with a delightful absurdity. Laughter erupted from each and every corner, echoing stories of our little skunk saga that had united us against the tyranny of Geraldine's strict, iron-fisted reign. Amidst this revelry, Geraldine clutched her clipboard with the concentration of a high-stakes referee, ensuring that no one wielded oversized water balloons without proper adherence to HOA standards. Remember, she barked, her thin lips almost trembling from both authority and laughter. Safety first! No violence! There we were, a giddy survivalist crew of costumed skunks, safeguarding propriety like a group of future squatters, in a world equally divided between chaos and decorum. Tyler sidled up to me, stifling a laugh, and whispered, maybe her safety paranoia will prove this gathering to be some sort of social experiment. My heart danced as I imagined her conducting studies on our skunky behavior, measuring the giggles per minute in her dusty notebook. As the sun dipped lower, casting a warm golden glow over our group, it became clear that Geraldine was losing her grip, albeit in the most amusing way possible. Children darted past her, flinging skunk-themed confetti like it was the last New Year's celebration in existence, while the more mischievous teenagers devised a skunk ball throw competition that threatened to scoot Geraldine into a spiral of frantic notes. Suddenly, the elderly woman burst out in a fit of laughter, startling both herself and us, while I shot a priceless look at Tyler, incredulous as if to say, did we just witness a rare event? In that moment of revelry, I began to understand the hilarity behind chaotic community dynamics and how they can unearth laughter even from the most stubborn souls. But typical of a wild skunk day, the ultimate act of absurdity was yet to unfold. Just when we were settling into a symphony of giggles and carefree celebrations, Geraldine's hawkish eyes fixated on a group of kids who had taken it upon themselves to craft a skunk sludge challenge. Without missing a beat, they began to slip and slide in the homemade sludge, which was a mix of melted chocolate and whipped cream. I felt my stomach lurch as the squad of kids gleefully tumbled over each other, exploding into fits of sticky laughter, but alas, Geraldine gaped, aghast. Turning towards me, I couldn't help but tease, quick, let's save her. She's turning into a permanent statue of horror. Tyler gave me a mock salute, adrenaline charged, whether from laughter or sheer panic. By that point, I couldn't tell. As if the universe perfected its drama, Geraldine's pristine blouse had caught a bit of the skunky sludge as she rushed towards the chaos, and instantly she was enveloped in giggles from all corners. The sight of the strict queen of propriety smeared in faux skunk was none short of poetic justice. For the first time in months, tension dissolved into quaking laughter, which cackled throughout our gathered group like wildfire. It was in this crisp moment of humanity mingling with hilarity that even Geraldine coughed out laughter, as if humor had finally slipped past the iron gates of her rigid fortress. My heart swelled with joy as Tyler leaned over to me again, breathless. "We should have done this sooner. I think I want to add skunk consultant to my resume." As the moon rose higher, illuminating our parade of lively skunks, I heard the whispers of a deeper bond forming. What started as heartbreak over stolen packages had spiraled into a vibrant camaraderie, an unbreakable bond over the hilarious misfunctionalities of our neighborhood community. Geraldine, now smeared with sweet chaos yet unable to hide her newfound smile, looked genuinely pleased, almost embracing her unpredictable transformation. Those skunk costumes became the epitome of acceptance, and I, for one, felt lighter, stirring with hope for the wild possibilities our neighborhood could yield. There was no denying our little skunk soiree had rewritten some unknown rules of the HOA, probably leaving Geraldine with a question mark over her moral compass. As twilight wrapped itself around us like a comforting blanket, Geraldine raised her arms one last time, ushering a cheer and repeating her notion of maintaining some order within our makeshift skunk universe. "All right, everyone, let's make this a day to remember," she exclaimed, and as her voice rang out into the night, it hit me. Perhaps, after a day filled with collective silliness, there's something genuinely spectacular about finding community spirit among absurdity. Cherry on top, right? Yes, I had unknowingly found my tribe, not by disgracing the HOA, but rather by honoring the spirit of spontaneity and laughter. After all, wasn't it only fitting that our community built around a forgotten skunk saga would bear the sweetest memories? Would we all carry this energy into the days that followed?